Hello, everybody. Masechet Eruvin, Daf Kof Bet 102. We're starting at the Mishnah right before. This Perek is a miscellany of various topics that are just connected by association. We started talking about if I'm in one area, if I move something in that's in a different domain. And one of example of that was a doorway where I could put my hand through the door and open it from the other side. And since we mentioned doors, we're going to say a few more things about doors because doors are really interesting. And in this case, it's about using the door bolts, which could be a problem theoretically of building if it's depending on many things. So that's what we'll start with, and we'll end with fixing bandages, and then finally fixing strings of instruments. So a lot of different topics that all have to do with not fixing something or building something on Shabbat. Okay, so we start with this. Neged sheyesh berosho gelustera, Rabbi Eliezer osed, Rabbi Yosef matir. So we have a door bolt, but it's not a regular door bolt. It has some kind of knob at the end, kind of like in this picture. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says you cannot use it. Rabbi Yosef says you can use it. What's the difference between them? It seems that Rabbi Yosef says this kind of looks like a pestle. You can use it to grind things and smash things. And therefore, since it's a utensil, you could say, look, I'm just using a utensil. And people don't build things with utensils, right? And therefore, it doesn't look like you're building. If you would take a hammer and stick it in the door, you wouldn't call that building because you're using a utensil. So the Bio says it's fine, but it's kind of a borderline utensil. It's not really made for that. So for that reason, the Eliezer says, no, you cannot use it. All right, now we have a story, and each of them use the story. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Maaseh b'chneset shebetiberia. There was a synagogue in Tiberias, in Galilee. Shayu nohagin bo heter. They had exactly just this kind of knob, bolt, and they used to use it until the Ban Gamliel came and told them not to use it. So you see, this is a proof for the Eliezer who says that it's not allowed to be used. Rabbi Yosef, however, says, I have a different version of the story. He says, Isur nahagubo, no, that they prohibited it in the synagogue. They wouldn't use it. And the Ban Gamliel came and looked at it and says, oh, you're allowed to use it. This is considered a utensil, so it's fine. And therefore, it's a proof for Rabbi Yosef. Okay, they both agree that there was some story that happened and the Ban Gamliel came and changed it, but they don't know which way it was, so each one uses it as a proof for their own opinion. Okay, good. So now some more variations of different kinds of things. Benital biigdo kule alma la pelige ki pelige beshe'eno nital biigdo. Okay, so now it depends on, according to this, is it attached to the door? So if it's attached to the door, so this is what we're talking about. In those days, there's different kinds of locks and bolts. Some of them can go in the side or down into the floor. So this is the best scenario if it's attached to the door and totally hanging. Because if you use it this way, everyone who looks at it says, oh, this is a door bolt. It doesn't look like building. It's a dedicated item for the door. In between cases, if it's hanging and half on the floor and half off the floor, that's a little less, less noticeable. The worst case, if it's totally not connected to the door, then it looks like you're just taking some piece of wood and you're building with it. So that's the hierarchy of cases. Now we're just talking about this rope here. How strong is it? So if it's a strong rope, and if you pick up the rope, the rest of the bolt will come with it. Then everyone agrees that it's fine. It's part of the door because it's well connected. The only difference of opinion between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yosef in the Mishnah is if it cannot be picked up by the rope. The rope is not strong enough. So in that case, Rabbi Yosef says, since it has this big piece on top, a knob on top, it's a utensil and therefore allowed to be handled. And the other one says, no, but it's barely attached to the rope, so therefore it's not allowed. Okay, that's that Mishnah. All right, now another kind of bolt. This is now a regular bolt. It doesn't have a knob on it. Neged hanigrad, a bolt that's dragging. no'alin bo b'mikdash, avalo b'medina. So in the Beit HaMikdash, they also had doorways and doors and locks. And in the Beit HaMikdash, things are more lenient. You might think Beit HaMikdash should be more stringent, but no, it is a law that is a rule that and shivut b'mikdash, that laws that are only midrabanan, if they're needed to do in the Beit HaMikdash, it's permitted because the Kohanim will be careful and don't even need to make a gezerah that they might come to do something wrong in the Beit HaMikdash. It's kind of similar today that there's a lot of things that one is allowed to do in a Beit Knesset, like you can ask the non-Jew to turn on the lights or the air conditioning in a Beit Knesset because it's needed for the Rabbim, a lot of people there, which we would not be allowed to do at home. Okay, so in the Beit HaMikdash, they could be lenient, and if you have a door bolt that is connected but dragging on the ground, then it's permitted. But outside the Beit HaMikdash, you cannot use such a door bolt because then it's going to come to building. And if it's totally separate, in other words, this case, munach, where it's not connected to the door, then in neither case, then you're not allowed to do it at all. That's really building. That's the first opinion, Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda, however, is more lenient on both. He says, "Hamunach mutar b'mikdash v'nigrar b'medina." He takes everything one step down. If it's totally disconnected, that's allowed in the Beit HaMikdash. That would only be a drabanan. V'nigrar, and if it is connected, even though it's half on the floor, then it's permitted in the outside the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so now we have a braita that really clarifies what these terms are. It doesn't add that much that's new. Tanu Rabbanan, Ezehu neged hanigrad. What does that mean? A dragging bolt. Sheno'alin b'mikdash avalo b'medina, the one that you're allowed to use in Beit HaMikdash but not outside, according to Tanakama. Kol shekashur v'talui. That means it's tied, connected, and it's hanging. And one side of it is on the floor. In other words, like this picture here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ze af medina mutar. Rabbi Yehuda says in that case where it's dragging, that would be allowed anywhere. Ela ezehu neged sheno'alin b'mikdash avalo b'medina. So what is permitted in the Beit HaMikdash but not outside? Kol sheno lo kashur velo talui b'shamto manicho b'keren zavit. Something that's not connected at all, not hanging at all, and it's just there left in the corner. And so there it doesn't really look like much of a doorstop because it's not connected to the door at all. All right, so that's the braita. Now, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda banigrar. So Shmuel says that we can follow the lenient opinion regarding the one that drags. In other words, outside the Beit HaMikdash, you are allowed to follow that opinion. Not necessarily do we follow his opinion in the Beit HaMikdash, but we can follow it outside. Good. Amar Rava, v'hu shekashur badelet. Now, Rava is making clarification. When we say connected, it has to be connected to the door, like in this case. Not good enough if it's only connected to the wall or the door post. And it's convenient, but it's not as apparent then that it's for the door if it's only connected to the door post. It's got to be connected to the door. That's what Rava said. But we have a question to him. Ini always introduces another source that is in contradiction. Once this Rabbi Tivla went to the city of Mechoza in Bavel, and he saw this bolt that was suspended from the side of the door, right, from the door post. And the rabbi did not say anything. He did not object. So you see, it seems to be allowed. Why does Rabbi say it's not allowed? Well, we say that's different. That one had a strong rope that could be picked up. And so as we said, we made a distinction before, if it's well connected with a strong rope, then that's more lenient. So then it can even be connected to the side. When it's on the door itself, then even a slightly weaker rope is okay. Well, how weak can the rope be? Not too weak, as in the following story. Another city in Bavel, and Rav went there. And he was tying a bolt with a reed, just a little reed that can't hold up anything. So Amar den la nitrok. He said, this you cannot use this lock on Shabbat, even though it's connected to the door, but it's only by a reed that you can't. It'll come apart in a second. So that's the range of different materials that would be good and not good. Next case, Ba'ai Rabbi Zera, Nikmaz Mahu. What if the door bolt is pressed down into the ground? I'll show you a picture, kind of like this. Um, Here, right? Usually, you have a door, the bottom of the door step, and so usually the lock would go down here. But what if the lock goes down further, all the way into the ground, right? So that's that's more like building when you have to push it all the way down there into the ground. It's a bit worse. So what do you think about that, Nikmaz? Right? Would that be the same law? Amar Rav Yosef, why are you asking this question? We know the answer. Lashmi aleh hadetanya. We have it in the Braita. Nishmat asur. If it's not connected, you're not allowed to use it. If it's not tied on, nikmaz mutar. If it goes down into the ground, that's fine. Rabbi Yehuda Amar nikmaz afapishe no nishmat asur. He says no. If it goes down and pressed down all the way into the ground, then it's not allowed. Even if it's attached, it's not allowed. So we have machloket about it. And Shemuel said, we follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who is machmir here. So there you go, it's not allowed. Why? Because it looks like building. You're like driving a stake all the way into the ground. That looks like you're building. All right, next question. Abaye just said that. We have a question on him now. Asado bet yad mahu. What if you have a handle for the bolt, kind of like this, right? Some kind of handle that you put around it. Does that make it better? Amar le buchna ka'amart. Oh, you're talking about a pestle. I'll show you a picture of a pestle. You probably know what it looks like, right? So here, right? So if you put a handle around it, then that's like a pestle, which is a utensil, and that would be fine. Here he says something like this, whatever, some kind of handle that makes it easier to use. And so therefore would be allowed. Itmar amar Rav Nechume bar Ada asalo bet yad mutar. Okay, so that's good. The story. Hahu shadita dahava be Rabbi Pedat. There was this big crossbeam, a big beam in his house of Rabbi Pedat. Dahava madlula be'asara ushtulahu la adasha. It was so heavy, it took 10 people to lift it. And at night, they would pick it up and put it by the doorway, and that was their lock, right? Because it was so heavy, and that the thieves wouldn't be able to get in. And Pedat was fine. The students did that to lock the door, and he was fine with it. Why? Why was that okay? Amar torat kili aleha. It's a utensil. How is it a utensil? Well, because you could sit on it. It's a bench, and so during the day when they were studying, they would sit on it, and then at night they would push it off to the side. So since it's a utensil, they're allowed to handle it on Shabbat. Another story. Hahi asita dahava be mor Shemuel. There was a certain mortar, right? The bottom of a big grinder, of a big grinding mill. Dahava machazeket adriba, but a really big one that could hold adriva, half a core. Shera mor Shemuel lemishdeya adasha, and Shemuel similarly permitted it. Amar torat keli aleha. This is not a building material, but rather it's a utensil, and so therefore moving around something that is a utensil is permitted. Good. Now we have a question. Another statement or a story. Shalach le'Rameh bar Yechezkel le'Rav Amram. They said Rabbi Yechezkel sent a request, maybe through a messenger or a student that was going there. He says, Nemalan mor mehalen mile ma'alyata da'amart lan mishmeh derav asi bechefe de'arba. He says, I remember that you used to teach some fantastic Torah, some great halachot in the name of Rav Asi regarding a boat that had arches on it, kind of like this, right? But I forgot what those halachot were. But I remember you said some great things about it. Can you please tell me what you said? So Shalach le, he sent back the following: Hachi amar Rav Aseh, hane kefe de arba, bizman sheyesh behen tefach, iname, en behen tefach, ve'en ben ze laze shelosha, lemachar mevir machaleset ufores alehen. So let's say on Shabbat you want to be able to sit in this boat with shade and have shade on it. But you don't want to leave it all covered at night. Maybe it's too windy. So are you allowed to cover it on Shabbat itself? So in general, you're not allowed to make a tent, right? But you are allowed to lengthen a tent that's already there. So his solution is, if you have an arch, and the arch is 1 tefach wide, you have some material on there that's 1 tefach wide, then that's already a tent. And so if it's 1 tefach wide, then I can just add more material because I'm not making a new tent. I am only increasing the size of a tent. Or even if I just have these bare bones um, uh, uh, sections here, as long as each one is less than 3 tefachim apart, I apply lavud. And so that I say that this frame, right, is itself a tent, because it's all lavud, so it's all as if it's filled in. And then I can take a sheet and I can cover it, and then we can go in there and be in the shade, and that could be very nice on Shabbat. So that's the nice halacha. All right. My ta'ama mosif alohel arayhu v'shapir dameh. Because you're not making a new tent, you're only adding to a temporary tent, and that is permitted. Good. Hanahu dichre dehavu le Rav Huna. Rav Huna owns some rams, and these were very particular rams. The bimama be'u tula ubelida be'u avira. During the day, they wanted shade, and at night they wanted to have air. So they needed their environment set up just right. Now, what are you going to do on Shabbat? Because now that means on Shabbat, at night they have no cover, and during the day they want it to be covered. How can you make a cover at night? So they came to Rav for advice. Zil kiroch budya v'shayer bat tefach ulmachar pishatah umosif al ohel arayhu v'shapir dameh. So he said, go and get a mat and roll it up, but leave 1 tefach open. And on the next day, you can roll it closed, and that way you'll be fine. In other words, like this, right? So you have the mat, you roll it up, but you leave 1 tefach there. So therefore, it is already covered. And so then when I unroll it, I'm only increasing the size and not making a new tent. So therefore, that's fine. This is a very practical halacha. For example, if you have a baby stroller, right, and the baby stroller has a little awning, right, so even when the awning is open, right, it still takes up some room. It's still a tefach, and therefore you can extend it and close it even on Shabbat. Or if you have to attach to your house, you have an awning, right? So when you close the awning, assuming it still takes up some room, and still has some covering of 1 tefach, then you're allowed to open the awning even on Shabbat. And here's a picture of the covered. Here's the picture of that log. Okay, good. So we have lots of interesting cases here. Now, next case. Amar Rav Mishum Rabbi Chiya. Vilon mutalin totomot aleforko b'Shabbat. You're allowed to pull down curtains on Shabbat. If you have curtains in your house by your windows, you can pull them down, even if there were no window there, and you wanted to because that's temporary. And I guess even if it would go on a little bit of an angle, that would also be okay. That's spreading out something that's already there, and it's a temporary tent that you are extending, so that's fine. And now the bridal canopy. We actually saw this way back in Masechet Shabbat. This is a repeat. Kilat chatanim mutar leforka uvelintota b'Shabbat. Bridal canopy, you are allowed to take it apart and spread the cover on Shabbat over the bed. Okay, I guess because it's a temporary dwelling. But wait a second, can you make it? You can't make a new tent. Only extend a tent that's already there. So Rav Sheshet has 3 limitations to this law. Amar Rav Sheshet bered Rav Idi, lo maran ela she'en begaga tefach, aval yesh begaga tefach asur. This is only when it comes to a point on the top. But if on the top there is 1 tefach, then 1 tefach is the size of a tent. And so if the top is 1 tefach wide, then you're making a tent, so then it's not allowed. So only if it comes to a point. Second limitation, v'chen en begaga tefach, lo amaran ela b'she'en bepachot mishelosha samuch lagag tefach. Aval yesh bepachot mishelosha samuch lagag tefach, asur. And even if it comes to a point, if in the top 3 tefachim, it extends out the width more than a tefach, that's also bad, because we will apply lavud. And so in other words, if this, within here, this is all considered like together because of lavud. And so we would connect this here as if it's filled in. And if it's 1 tefach, then that's like a roof. and then that would also be prohibited because now you're making a new tent, and that's no good. And furthermore, even if it's less, still לא מרן אלא כשאין בשיפועה טפח. אבל יש בשיפועה טפח, שיפועי אוהלים כאוהלים דמו. Only if at the bottom where it extends out has to be less than a tefach. In other words, even down here, from this has to, when it comes down from here to here, has to be less than a tefach, and here less than a tefach. So therefore, this is pretty skinny, right? So you can have a little bit less than a tefach up here, a little bit less than a tefach here, and a little bit less than a tefach. Altogether, has to be slightly less than 3 tefachim, which means this is a bed that's only like 9 inches wide. So not very good as a bridal canopy. They have to snuggle quite closely. So not so useful. Therefore, it could be that Rashi says you could still construct one if you make it like this, right? If you do this multiple times, each one individually is not a tent because of all the requirements. But if you could put one next to the other, then you could make a nice bridal canopy that way. Okay. Good. Next statement. V'amarav shesha bered Rav Idi. Saina share. He says you are allowed to wear a hat. That's good. Okay. Why would you? Well, what would be the problem with the hat? The problem with the hat is that if it's a stiff felt hat or a regular hat, as in this picture, all right, you can see that perhaps if this would be a tefach wide, the brim, then that's a tent. Right, so when you put that on and walk around with it, you are creating a tent. So he has to say, "Oh, it's allowed," but this is not uncontroversial because Vatanya Asuri B'Braita says you're not allowed to wear a brimmed hat on Shabbat. So how are we going to resolve this? Lakashya hadit betefach hadilit betefach. Depends how big the brim is. If the brim is 1 tefach or more, then you're not allowed to wear the hat. If it's a small brim, then you're allowed to wear the hat. So, this would apply to a baseball cap. It's probably more than a tefach, and that would be a problem. And, some regular brimmed hats, I guess depends, what the model, what the style is, could be a problem. But we have another solution. Hold on, are you telling me that anytime I have something extending that it's going to be a problem? Like what if I just take my cloak and I extend it like a hood and I put it over my head and it extends more than a tefach? You're going to tell me that that's not allowed either? I mean, that's crazy. Nobody would say that I can't put a shawl over my head in such a way. Theoretically, you could make a difference. This is like a stiff thing. This is kind of soft, but all right, still, either way, you're making a tent, and so it would be a problem either way. Rather, we can make another distinction between this Mishnah and this statement of Ed and the Braita. That depends if it's tightly snug on your head. If it is tight on your head, then it's not going to fly off in the wind. That's good. If it's loose, then it's going to fly off in the wind. Then you're going to run after it, and you're going to carry it, and that is the problem. So as long as it fits snugly or is tied to your chin, then it's permitted. Okay, so this is the way out. This is why people allow themselves to wear hats, assuming this Ella here rejects all the opinions before, and so as long as it's tight, it's okay. However, there are some Rishonim that interpret this Ella not as rejecting, but as adding to, and so therefore it actually could be a problem to wear a hat on Shabbat if the brim is very big, and so that's the whole halachic discussion about wearing hats. Okay, and that is the end of that Mishnah. Also relevant here are umbrellas, because umbrellas are also kind of a temporary tent, and if the umbrella, let's say, is somewhat open or open before Shabbat, so then you're just extending a temporary tent that was already there, and so that would be similar to holding a cloth over your head, right? What would be the difference between those two? So that is also a subject of a lot of halachic discussion, and it's not so easy to figure out why an umbrella should be prohibited, but the general practice is not to use umbrellas. Okay, next Mishnah. Machazirin sir hatachton b'mikdash, avalo b'medina. Habahalion kan vekan asur. Rabbi Yehuda omer halion b'mikdash v'atachton b'medina. Okay, back to doors and fixing doors. So the doorways in those days didn't have hinges on the sides like our doors, but rather pivot hinges. I actually have some pivot hinges in my house, and for closet doors. So pivot hinges would go up into the top and down into the ground and turn that way. Now, if these get dislodged, are you allowed to fix them? So you can push the bottom one in the Bet HaMikdash. You can fix the bottom one, but not outside the Bet HaMikdash. And the top one is never allowed, not even in the Bet HaMikdash. What's the difference? Well, the top one comes out, it's totally broken, right? It's going to fall down. If the bottom one comes out, you can still use it because it's just resting on the ground. It'll just be really hard to close and open, but it's still, it's not as broken. So therefore, fixing the top is totally fixing and therefore not allowed anywhere. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda omer ha'alyon b'mikdash v'atachton b'medina. Rabbi Yehuda is a little bit more lenient, and he says if the top one comes out, well, that would be allowed in Bet HaMikdash. So in other words, Bet HaMikdash, you could fix the top or the bottom, and outside the Bet HaMikdash, you can fix the bottom, but just not the top one. That's the Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanan, Sir, Delet, Shida, Teva, or Migdal, Bamikdash Machzirin, Ubambedina Dochakin. So if you have not the doorway of a house, but rather a door of carriage, box, cupboard, all these like movable utensil items or furniture items. In these cases, you can outside the Bet HaMikdash, you can just push it back in place. Dochakin. Halyon kamakan lo yachzir. The top one, if it comes out totally, now in other words, if it's just a little slightly out of place, you push it back. It's okay. If it's totally out of place, then both in the Bet HaMikdash and outside, you cannot put it back because gezerah shema yitka. Because then you might come and bang it and really professionally perfect it and make it from an unusable to a usable item. If you do that, that is actually asur mid'oraita. And you have to bring a chatat if you did it by mistake, and therefore you can't do it in the Bet HaMikdash either. Okay, we're just going to show you some pictures since we have them. Right, this would be a teva, shida, migdal. Okay, all things that have doors. All right, shel bor v'shel dut v'shel yatzia. You have doors that open to a pit, cistern, or extension of a building. So these are things that are connected to the ground, not furniture. Lo yachzir. V'mechzir chayav chatat. This you cannot do anything. You can't put them back at all. That looks a lot more like building when it's something that's part of the ground. Good. Next Mishnah. This now has to do with bandages. Machazirin d'ritiya b'mikdash aval lo b'medina. Now, what's the problem of a bandage is that it has ointment on it, and you're not allowed to smooth out ointment. This has to do with preparation of leather. One of the melachot is when you prepare leather, you put material on it, you smooth oil and stuff on it. So, imagine if you put some Vaseline or ointment on something on a bandage and put it on a wound. So you can, if it's there before Shabbat, then, and it comes off, you can put it back on in the Bet HaMikdash, but not in Medina. What do you mean in the Bet HaMikdash? It means if there's a Kohen who's serving in the Bet HaMikdash, and in order to serve properly, he needs to have this bandage, it's on his hand or something, and he needs to, carry things. So then it's permitted in the Bet HaMikdash for the purpose of the service of the Bet HaMikdash. He can return it if it fell off. But outside, you cannot. If it falls off, you cannot put it back on. And if you're making a bandage for the first time, that's not allowed anywhere because that's a melacha d'oraita to make a new bandage and smear it on. All right, that's the Mishnah. Tenor Rabbanan. Baraita says, Ritiya sheparsha me'al gabe maka machazirin b'Shabbat. So Tanakama says, if something fell off, you're allowed to put it back on. Rabbi Yehuda omer, huchleka lemata, tochaka lemala. Lemala, tochaka lemata. He says, no, if it fell off totally, you can't put it back on. But if it was here and then it moved down, you can put it back into place. It moved up a little, you can push it back into place, but not if it totally came off. ומגלה מקצת הרתיעה ומקנח פי המכה, וחוזר מגלה מקצת הרתיעה ומקנח פי המכה. And you might even do that on purpose. You might push it down a little so that you can clean the wound, and then push it the other way, clean the other half of the wound. But don't clean the bandage itself, because that is where the ointment is, and then you're going to be smoothing it out, smearing. If you do smear, then that's one of the 39 balachot, so that would be chayav chatat. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. In this case, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. In this case, Rabbi Yehuda is more machmir. It says if it fell off, you cannot put it back on. Okay. Amar Rav Chisda lo shanu ela shepersha al gabe keli. He says now Rav Chisda is commenting on this on the Tanakh Kama. The sages who permit if it falls off that you can put it back on. That's only if it fell off on a utensil, like if it fell off on the bed, on the chair, then you could put it back on. Aval pesha al gabe karka. But if it fell on the floor, everyone agrees that that's not permitted to put it back on, because it's not quite putting it back on. That's more like a new one because it totally fell on the floor. Okay, and there's no 3-second rule here. All right. Amar mor bar Rav Asher hava kaimna kame abba. So Mor, the son of Rav Asher, was with one time standing before his father, Rav Asher, the great Rav Asher. Nafla le abe sadya. And he had a bandage. It fell onto a pillow, a utensil, and he put it back on. So Amin ale lo savar la mor lehad amar Rav Chisda machloket shepirsha al gabe keli aval pirsha al gabe karka asur v'amar Shemuel halacha ke'Rabbi Yehuda. So I asked my father, says, didn't you hear what Rav Chisda taught? Because he said that the machloket is regarding if it fell onto a utensil, and it did fall on a utensil here. So Tanakh Kama would say it's okay. Rabbi Yehuda would say it's not okay. And he also said in the name of Shemuel that halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. That's the problem. So therefore, it should be not allowed. So Rav Asher, how come you put it back on and you don't follow Rabbi Yehuda? The halacha is like him. Amali lashemi ali kilamal lasabir ali. He answered, I never heard that teaching. What he meant to say is, I don't agree with that teaching, right? Not that he heard it, but he did not agree. He didn't think the halacha was like the stringent opinion. Okay, so therefore he's allowed to put the bandage back on. And last topic of the day is fixing musical instruments. Koshrin nima b'mikdash. Nima is a Greek word that means a thread or a string, and in the Beit HaMikdash they would play instruments. We are not allowed to play instruments outside the Beit HaMikdash for precisely this reason. The string may break, and then you would come to tie it and make a knot and fix it, which is a problem. But in the Beit HaMikdash, right, as we said, anything that's necessary, you do. This is actually quite interesting. The question is it necessary to play instruments in the Beit HaMikdash? Is it just an added nice feature that just makes it more beautiful, or is it an integral part?
They used to play instruments there because for us, halachically now they're mukseh.
Now it's not only mukseh, it is mukseh, but also as a gezerah. If you play an instrument, you might be playing your guitar, and then the string breaks, and then you're going to go and fix the string, and you're not allowed to fix the string. So that's why we're not allowed to play instruments at all. Okay. So we don't play instruments at home, not in synagogue, not anywhere, right? But in the Beit HaMikdash, they are allowed to do a d'Rabbanan, as long as it's d'Rabbanan, if it's something that's needed for the sacrifice. So I'm just asking, is it needed for the sacrifice? I know you're allowed to, you're allowed to do anything, even the Doraita, if it's needed for the sacrifice. You can kill the animal, you can, sprinkle its blood, burn it, all these things are allowed. So is playing music during the service, is that necessary? Right, or just a nice feature. This was a controversy during the second Beit HaMikdash period, and the Dead Sea sect did not allow playing instruments on Shabbat. So it's interesting to see this Mishnah, because it means that according to the rabbis, you are allowed to play instruments on Shabbat because they think it is a necessary part of bringing the korban. Right, it's not just going through the motions. You got to create the atmosphere and play the music. So that's really interesting. Okay, koshrin nima b'mikdash. So if a string breaks on Shabbat, you're allowed to fix it. Aval lo b'medina, but not outside the Beit HaMikdash, you wouldn't be allowed. V'im b'techila kan v'kan asur. But if you just got a new instrument and you're stringing it for the first time, then you can't do that, right? Because you do that before Shabbat. Don't go and set up your new instrument on Shabbat. So you can't do it. You can't do it lechatechila. All right, that's the Mishnah. Now we have a contradictory baraita. Urminhu nimat kinor shenifseka lo haya koshra ela on ba. Says if a harp string breaks, you may not tie it with a regular knot. You have to make a bow in it, right? A temporary knot. Okay. I don't know if would that work? How would that sound? Well, we're going to get to that in a second, right? Right? Ela on va. So here it says that you're not allowed to make a knot. You have to make only a temporary knot. Lakasha hada banan. We resolve it by saying these are two different opinions. The one that says it's not allowed, in other words, the Mishnah, that is the opinion of Rabbanan. The Braita is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. If you remember way back in the end of Masechet Shabbat, Rabbi Eliezer says anything you're allowed to do on Shabbat, you're even allowed to do the preparations. So, for example, everybody agrees you could do Brit Milah on Shabbat. But how about carrying the knife to the place? Or how about making the knife, making a fire in order to sharpen the knife? Rabbi Eliezer says you can do all those things on Shabbat, even on purpose, because anything that helps you with the mitzvah, you're allowed to do on Shabbat. And therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he would say you can make a knot. Sorry, so Rabbi Eliezer is the Mishnah. I said the wrong way, right? Rabbi Eliezer is the Mishnah, which is more lenient and says make a knot, no problem. The Bananu say you cannot do things anything you could have done before you cannot do on Shabbat. So therefore, he would say that you have to make a bow. You can't do the full malacha on Shabbat. All right, so that would seem to work, except that Rabbi Eliezer damar machshirei mitzvah dochin et Shabbat koshra. The Rabbanan damre en dochin on ba. This explains what we just said. Rabbi Eliezer says you can do preparations for mitzvah that those override Shabbat. So then you would tie it fully, like the Mishnah says. The Rabbanan say you cannot. Therefore, you have to do the temporary bow. But this doesn't work. Rabbi Eliezer. If you follow the Rabbi Eliezer, then you can even string it a new instrument, because Rabbi Eliezer says you don't even have to bother making the knife from before. You can make it on Shabbat. You can carry it on Shabbat. You can even plan to do that, and so therefore there would be no problem of even putting new strings on a new instrument on Shabbat, and so that doesn't fit the Mishnah. So the Mishnah can't be his opinion. Rather, let's do second try. Ella lakashya. Hada biuda v'hada banan. Okay, so one follows the opinion of the Yehuda. This has to do with making knots. The Yehuda felt that making a bow or making a knot is equally prohibited. He felt that making a bow, like a temporary knot, is still prohibited, and therefore, since he makes no distinction between the two, he will be the author of the Mishnah that says you may as well just make a knot. And this Rabbanan, they're the ones that do make a distinction, and they say a bow is much less of a problem. Only the Rabbanan, so therefore make a bow and not a knot. That would be that's how we resolve those two. Hold on, the Rebbe Yehuda demand. The Rebbe Yehuda following whom? If the Rebbe Yehuda is following the opinion of Rebbe Eliezer that you can do all preparations, then even a new one. The same problem we had with Rebbe Eliezer before. You can put new strings. Ela lakashya, and if not, right, then it's equally prohibited. Rabbi Yehuda was actually more machmir. He said making a bow is like making a regular knot, and both of them are prohibited from from making it. So it wouldn't make sense to make him the author of the Mishnah, which is more lenient, when he's more stringent regarding knots. Rather, the third answer, Ella lakasha ha Rabbi Shimon ha Rabbanan the Tanya ben Levi shenifseka lo nima bekinor koshra. Rabbi Shimon omer onva. So here in this baraita, we see explicitly that it is in fact a machloket. Tanakama says that one of the Levim were the ones who played instruments. They were the musicians, and if he had a string broken in his harp, he can tie it. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon says No, make a bow. So that's it. There you go. Rabbi Shimon is the one opinion author of the Baraita. Tanakama is the author of the Mishnah. This Baraita quotes yet a third opinion, a really interesting one. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Af hi ena mashma'at et hakol. It doesn't work. You're going to make a bow in it. You're going to make a knot in it. It's not going to sound like anything. The vibrations don't pass through a knot well. I mean, it'll sound like something, but it's not going to sound good. Ela mesharshel milemata vekorech milema'la. He has rather a better idea. Whenever you string an instrument, you always leave some extra string on top that you wrap around. So let's say it broke here on the bottom. No problem. Just undo this, right? Push it down, and then you have a length of string from, you get some extra length here and push it down, and then you have a nice string without any knots. Right? Or if it breaks up here, the other way around, there's some extra string down here too. So that's what you're allowed to do. You can just re-string it, and then you don't have to make any knots. So that's a good solution. Or yet another answer to that to the problem we had before between the Mishnah and the Baraita. Maybe it's all the banan. In other words, that you can make a knot. Kan ba'emsa. Kan min hasad. Depends where it broke. If it broke in the middle, then or broke towards the end. So the Mishnah, which permits tying a string, that's where it's in the middle. And you can't make a bow there because it wouldn't sound good. So therefore, you can make a knot. But if it's at the end where making a bow will not affect the sound as much, then you can make a bow over there. All right. Or last possible answer, or both are talking about that it breaks in the middle. And one opinion, the opinion that says it's prohibited would make a decree. He says, I have a problem. Yeah, technically you would be allowed to tie it in the middle, but if we allow you to tie it in the middle, then one day you're going to end up tying it even at the end where it's not allowed to do. So therefore, don't tie it even in the middle, don't tie it at all. It won't sound so good, but too bad. And the rabbis who permit, they say, you do not make a gezerah, and the person will be careful. He only makes sure to tie it in the middle, but not at the end. And we'll end on that note. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen ve'amen.